Mark, you have been a frequent guest here at the Values Voters Summit over the last 8 years that we've had this. Would you have envisioned 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago, that we would be at the point that we're in our nation as it pertains to the ignoring of the constitutional boundaries of what this administration is doing?
Yes, and it's going to get worse. And it's going to get worse because it feeds on itself. We are unmoored from the rule of law. And so the President of the United States can say brazenly, and people barely blink, that if Congress doesn't act, he will. These are the statements of soft tyranny. That's what that is. When Congress says they're going to pass omnibus bills, and they pass them in the dark of night, Obamacare, and we, the people, don't even get an opportunity to read it in advance, that is called tyranny. When the bureaucracy spits out rules that shut down our coal mines and shut down pipelines and shut down our fisheries, even though Congress hasn't agreed to act, that's called tyranny. When the Supreme Court of the United States overturns votes in California or rewrites our statutes in this country, that's called tyranny. So what are we going to do about it? That's the question, and that's why I wrote it.
And let's talk about that answer. How do you actually propose something in this book that heretofore you were not supportive of?
That's good. I propose that we look at the Constitution to find the answer to what's going on in this country. We don't have to invent it. We don't need abstractions. We don't have to make it up. And it's in the Constitution. And George Mason said, and he was right, that when Congress turns oppressive, and what he meant was this new federal government, that the people have to have recourse short of violence. And he said that recourse is, this is 2 days before the end of the Constitutional Convention, he said that recourse is in the people and the state legislatures, and that they need to be able to go to the state legislatures, and the state legislatures collectively, 2/3, can have a meeting called a convention, not a constitutional convention, a convention to propose amendments to all the other states, just as if Congress meets to propose amendments to the states. And that is how we return to a constitutional republic, which, folks, we simply do not have today.
So the key here is, one of the keys, is returning a focus to the states, which in many ways have just become the lackeys for the federal government in terms that this administration expects the states to carry out its orders, where it really should be reversed.
You realize the states have less influence in our government than like LULAC or the AFL-CIO or whatever they are, and the fact is that under our constitutional system, it's the federal government that has limited defined powers, and the states have plenary authority. But obviously that doesn't happen today, does it? Now, some of you come from blue states. I apologize that you're in these blue states. I refuse to live in a dark blue state, but some of you live in dark blue states, and you're saying, well, this is great for those of you who are in purple states and red states, and my answer to you is this. America is a blue state right now, and the only way to address this is to find 34 state legislatures, and to take the time to do it. It took us a century to get here, and so it may take us 20 or 30 years to get out of this. But we have no options. This is the only option. It's us in the state legislatures, and the state legislatures collectively have enormous power. Enormous power. Not the governors, they're not involved. Not the state courts, they're not involved. I don't care if no senator or no member of Congress supports this. We bypass them. That's the entire purpose of this process. When you watch the Senate floor and you see a handful of conservatives defending this nation against Obamacare, and they are under brutal assault in their own party, something is wrong. When Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and Rand Paul are the exception, something is wrong in that party. And I do not believe that Washington intends to reform itself. Just see it, what's going on right now. What are they fighting over? Really, they're fighting over nothing. We have a $17 trillion fiscal operating debt that's growing by $1 trillion every year. We have over $90 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Not a darn thing they're doing up there is going to change that trajectory. So what are we going to do? Surrender to this? Well, we have to stand up for ourselves. And the way we stand up for ourselves is in the state legislatures. One at a time, patiently but aggressively, we take back our country.
With the focus being on the states and the pathway forward that you've laid out in the Liberty Amendments, which, by the way, is available here at the bookstore, you've got to be encouraged by what you've seen happen in the states in the last few years. I mean, there are good trends at the state. When you look at what's happening here in Washington as the backdrop, that is discouraging. But what's happening in the states is quite encouraging.
It's encouraging, and what's happening is a lot of the states are trying to resist in different ways that they can. But because what's happened in Washington, D.C., we don't really have checks and balances. What you're seeing going on right now, I can already tell you what's going to happen. The debt's going to go up. There's still going to be a massive yearly deficit. They'll throw us something like repeal of the medical tax or something like that. But it's going to keep moving in that direction because that's all they know. Because the left knows that they run the country. And the Republicans basically support the status quo with some adjustment. That's about it. So we're stuck. If you think this top-down, authoritarian, centralized method that somehow we can fix this, I'm not saying don't stop fighting in these primaries and everything. Of course, fight everywhere and at every time. But fundamentally, at least for the last 100 years and certainly the last 80 years, what's happened is they've changed the system. So the social compact's been broken. So the Constitution is not honored. And so if they're not honoring the Constitution, what do we, who believe in constitutional republicanism, what do we do about it? And I'm just saying that the framers told us what to do about it if we seek to do it. Now, I accept that humans are imperfect. I accept that every institution in this country is imperfect. I accept that states are imperfect. But that's the genius of the federalism system. Power is dispersed. If you have one out-of-control state or 10 out-of-control states, there's still 40 more states. But if you have one out-of-control Supreme Court, one out-of-control Congress, and one out-of-control president, there's nowhere to go. And that's the problem. Unless we go back to the Constitution to save the Constitution. That's the answer.